Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's episode on college application essays. We're excited, or sorry, not college application essays. That's tomorrow. I apologize. That's College Admissions 101 today. We're excited to talk to you tonight about letters of recommendation. I'm joined with my colleague, Maureen Delaney. Go ahead, Maureen, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, I'm Maureen Delaney. I see that maybe a few of you were here last week, so welcome. Today we're talking about teacher recs and looking forward to getting to the bottom of the teacher essays.
That's a good way of putting it, because we often forget that teachers have to write their own essays on behalf of you for your application, and it can be as demanding and taxing and perhaps even tedious as your own application essays, which we do have a channel for that. It's tomorrow, Thursdays, 5:10. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about your application essays, please join us at that time. My name is Jeff Knox, and I'm an educational counselor at PrepMatters. And both Maureen and I like to guide students through their educational plan with an aim at college admissions. And if you have any questions that you'd like to direct to either of us, our contact information is on the screen. We also have a Q&A feature for this class on Zoom, so feel free to use it. And if there's a question that we're able to get to during today's episode, we will. And if we are not able to get to your question, again, please contact us directly. If you have questions about PMTV or the way this class works, then you can contact classes at prepmatters.com via email. And of course, you can always call us at 301-951-0350. So let's dig right into it. Today's topic is letters of recommendation. And you've been to this channel before, perhaps. If you haven't, then you do not know yet that we are going to show you a table that we like to show at the beginning of every college admissions topic to give some perspective and on how important letters of recommendation are to a college admissions officer as they're trying to make a decision. And of course, college admissions, they're a little different these days. The whole world is a little different these days. And so we want to remember that context as we move through. And if you've been to our previous episodes on topics such as the transcript and course selection and test scores like subject tests and such, you might remember that the data that colleges used to be able to rely on consistently is a little murkier these days. The transcript for this grading period is a little hard to decipher. Some schools obviously are going test optional. It was reported or announced just a few hours ago that the College Board will not be offering SAT or subject tests for their June dates. They will start offering them again in September with the new dates. And so because a lot of that data is no longer available in the same way, it's logical to think that maybe the subjective pieces, like recommendations, will rise in importance. But the latest data we have on this is that more than half of schools that are surveyed by the National Association of College Admissions Counseling place substantial importance on recommendations, both from the counselor and from teachers. And when you look at this table, it's interesting to see how things stack up. But one of the points that we like to make is that there is no perfect formula for college admissions. So please don't see this table and say, oh, aha, here is the key to my college admissions journey. It's not true for every college that this is the ranking, right? There are some colleges out there that actually don't look at don't look at letters of recommendation at all. And so obviously they're in the category of no importance that you see over to the right. There are some schools that are test optional. I mean, every school is different. So your job is to do the research, dig into the admissions policies of each school, which is pretty easy to do. You can go to their websites and see what's required, what's not required, and they even give advice for their particular school, and determine what is important for each school that you're interested in. And of course, there are a lot of resources to help you, your school counselor, people like Maureen and myself, that can help you make sense of all of this. But I think it's interesting to see that, generally speaking, for most colleges, this is a substantial piece of the admissions process when they're trying to make decisions on your application. And we like to remind everyone every time that no surprises here, grades in your classes and the kinds of classes you decide to take, they are significantly important. They're always at the top of the list, and there are very rare exceptions that a college finds that there is no importance for your grades or your course curriculum. But let's go back to letters of rec. And Maureen, tell us who are the people who are going to write these letters?
Well, I think who is exactly what we want to be talking about here, because behind the grades and the scores is a who, and that is you. And so that's exactly what colleges are trying to get to the bottom of. So who are you? So now we go to the other aspect, the other subjective part of the application, not who, teachers. So there are usually two core academic teachers who you will ask to write a recommendation for you. And it's typically a junior year teacher, because junior year is really the most important year, because it's really who you are now. And it's closest to who you will be when you pack up and move on campus and start your undergraduate experience. So really they're interested in who are you now? And tell us a little bit, the colleges want to know from the teachers, do you have any stories to share? Can you tell us about this person as a learner, as a person who comes to class every day? Ideally, these are core academic classes, as I said. So really those main courses, those fundamental high school courses, and not elective courses that are part of a high school curriculum. Vividness, more important than who. So what this means is you really want someone who's going to be able to tell your story. So, you want to think about who knows you well, who will represent you, and the whole sort of puzzle of your application, who's going to add some insight that will contribute to the understanding of you as this three-dimensional being. Your counselor, so you want two teachers, and then your counselor, who will also write a recommendation for you. So your counselor will speak to who you are within the community, speak to knowing you for several years, knowing you over time, and other just personal contributions that they can add to this narrative. I know students from very large high schools might respond and listen, my counselor, I don't really know my counselor, and there are just so many students. But understand that colleges look at students' applications from all over the world. So they are looking at applications from small schools, large schools, all just kinds of experiences in high school. So just be sure that your recommendations will be read from the context of your application in your high school. So bear that in mind. So the third type of recommendation that you might seek when you're looking for support in this way is an arts. So your teacher in music, your art teacher, a coach, a supervisor from an internship, club, organization sponsor, anybody who really knows you well and knows a particular skill that you have, who can speak to your leadership or your dedication to music. So someone who can really, again, represent who you are and can share with the colleges a unique piece of your life. And then it's rare, but there may be an opportunity here or there when you can ask a peer and they can write on your behalf.
This is a pretty typical formula for the letters of recommendation that you should expect to secure. there are, it's very possible that you might apply to some schools that don't even allow you to send more than a single teacher rec and a single counselor rec. And like I said, as I said before, there are some schools that don't look at recommendations at all. But if you want to be fully prepared for pretty much every possible letter of recommendation policy out there, then this is a good guideline. 2 teachers, a counselor, someone outside of your academic experience, the other, and then peer you don't have to worry about too much because it is really rare, but just in case we want you to be aware of that, and just in case you happen to apply to one of those schools that says, yes, we'd like a peer recommendation or something like that. What's interesting about recommendations is that you are in control of a lot of pieces of this application process. You to some extent can prepare for your standardized tests. You can feel ownership over your grades. You obviously have full control over what you write about in your essay. It feels, though, as if you have zero control over what a teacher writes about you. I mean, we really don't know. And you actually sign away your right to look at these documents. They're technically educational documents that you have a legal right to, but you sign away your rights in order to apply to pretty much any college in the country. So you don't even get to see what these people are saying about you. But what Maureen and I want to talk to you about today is that even though it feels like you have zero control, you do have some sense of control. You do have there are certain elements of the process of preparing for your letters of recommendation to be created and submitted on your behalf. And we want to take you through that step by step so that you can look back on how you prepared yourself and prepared your advocates for this part of the application process. Before we get into those steps, let's talk a little bit about why colleges want them so much. I mean, obviously, they provide vivid information, right? But you might be thinking, are they really reading up to 4 or more letters of recommendation about me when they have thousands and thousands of applicants? Well, indeed they are, and even more so now because of what I said earlier about having less data to work with the coronavirus impacting transcripts and scores. They will have to look elsewhere. And the letters of recommendation, I hear from admissions deans over and over again, are some of the most interesting and fascinating pieces of an application because it's the adult perspective on you. It's the adult narrative about your narrative. And they're untouched by you. They can trust them. Not to say that you're not trustworthy, but they know that they are pure in a sense. And
can I say this? Think of it as if the colleges are asking for a glimpse into your daily life at school. And here's where you can kind of control the glimpse they're asking for. You have a choice. You select the 2 teachers that are going to provide that glimpse. So, so that's one way to think about it.
Just to wrap this slide up, we got a question from the audience. Do the 2 teachers have to be from junior year? Is that a requirement? It's usually not a requirement. Now, you'll want to be careful. There are some schools that have very specific criteria for which teachers you may choose. There are some schools that ask that you get 2 teachers, 1 from the humanities, 1 from the STEM subjects. Some might say we really, really, really want them to be from junior year. But generally speaking, this is just good advice. This is just guidance to Maureen's point that you want to pick adults who have a snapshot or a glimpse of who you are in the moment right now, not necessarily who you were 2 years ago, which you were probably very different 2 years ago. However, the slide earlier, which I actually can go back to, says vividness is more important than who. And so if you believe that a sophomore year teacher, even a freshman year teacher with whom you've stayed in contact is simply going to write a better narrative, a more vivid story, paint a better picture of who you are, well then, yeah, it probably does make sense to go to one of those people. Generally speaking though, if you need 2 teacher recs, I want my students to endeavor to have at least one of them from junior year. Otherwise, it might seem to admissions that you're avoiding asking the most recent teachers you've had, and that's probably an impression you want to avoid. But there are exceptions to pretty much anything we say, And that's why we are here to help students, because everyone's plan is different. But that was a really good question. Thank you for asking it. All right, so Maureen, how do they get to the actual colleges? Do the students have to mail them with blindfolds on because they're not allowed to look?
Throw them. So who sends them? How do they get there? So the school is almost always responsible for sending them because it's part of the secondary school report. And it's a funny, this is a transition for high school students because suddenly the high school is supporting you. You're the real principal applicant, right? You're the principal person taking action here. So you're most important. And the school's supporting you through their report. And what do they send? They send the counselor recommendations, teacher recommendations, your transcript, and the school profile, information about the school, so that you will want to follow the instructions from your college guidance department on how to secure your teacher recommendations through Naviance or the other electronic options that they use for the college applications and supporting you. So it could be directly through the Common App. So again, obtain those instructions from your school and follow them closely. So when you get the other recommendation from, say, your supervisor from an internship over the summer, that's going to come in. It can be mailed, but also it can be emailed directly to the admissions office, and you can send it to the admissions office. If you've met the area representative for the school, for several of your schools, you can email it directly to them. But what you want to do is have that letter accompany all the other information in your file. So it can be mailed directly, snail mail also.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that every high school has a different process. So you'll want to know from your college counseling office how your high school handles teacher and counselor recs versus the additional other coach or whatever rec. And there are some high schools even today that use actual USPS mail to send physical letters. It's still happening, but obviously so many are moving to electronic submissions. I just want to make a note that the school is responsible for getting the letters to the colleges. Your high school will get those teacher recs to the college, but they are not necessarily responsible for securing the letters, meaning actually identifying which teachers who are going to write the letters for you and at what point do they know that. Another way to think about securing a letter is the ask. How do you actually ask a teacher for this letter of recommendation? Many of you might be wondering, and it can feel a little awkward. You're asking for a favor. You're asking for someone to do something for you. And for some of us, it's a tough thing to do. But what we're going to talk about next is how to ask. And it's more than just a single sentence, will you write me a letter of recommendation? There are some things to consider. And this is the part we want to equip you with, so that when you do make the ask, you feel really clear about the process and what you're asking, and confident that these letters are going in the direction that will benefit your application the most.
And just to make a comment that the request this year will be in writing. So just be thinking about how you may compose this email to your teacher when usually this would have been done face-to-face.
It's a really good point. Yeah. So there are some things that we want you to be able to avoid, and let's bring those up first so that you can be aware of some common drawbacks or pitfalls in the letter recommendation department, so that you can feel good about your process and hopefully avoid these things. A common thing that can happen is that a teacher who perhaps isn't the right candidate to write a letter, but says yes anyway, or doesn't know you as well, might state the obvious in a letter. For example, what's on your activities list in the application? one thing that I'm always a little wary of is if a teacher says, yeah, I'll write you a letter. Why don't you send me your resume or a list of your activities so I can talk about all the great things you do outside of my class? I'm like, wait a minute. Why would we want a teacher to refer to your resume or your student activities list, which is already going to be in your application? To me, that's a missed opportunity. And so if you follow the instructions or the guidance rather from Maureen and me today, that you will be able to avoid these kinds of positive but really general statements, because the teacher perhaps is overworked or has a lot of recommendations to write, or maybe perhaps you asked a little late in the game and they want to help. They're going to write a positive letter, but perhaps it's not as vivid as it could have been if you ask in the right way, which we're going to get to in a second. So these are some examples of positive things, but they might show up elsewhere in the application, or perhaps they're not as vivid. They're not vivid enough to add value to your application.
I just want to share for a minute what a high school student said to me last week. He said, it took me a couple of years, but I've now realized that the teachers really are there to help you and want to help you and actually enjoy it. And although, of course, there can be exceptions, but really teachers are there. They're excited to see you putting together these applications and excited to see you look to the future. So don't be bashful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I was talking with a student earlier this week, and he said, I feel like my education's a two-way street. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, that's a great way to think about it. But yes, of course, right? It's not just teacher inserts knowledge into your head. It's not just teacher does something for you. You have an active role, obviously, as well. Sometimes it's just an interesting point, and again, we're gonna give you advice on how to avoid this kind of stuff. But teachers who want to help and also at the same time be honest will use language that in a college admissions office is what's the word I'm looking for? Not code, but a language that's recognizable. They've seen it before, and over time they've started to realize that maybe there's more layers of meaning to it than the surface level. So, for example, and respectful and contemplative could be interpreted as quiet. Gregarious could be a euphemism for disruptive, right? A late bloomer is a really common one, meaning, okay, we get it. Didn't know what he or she was doing in the beginning, is now starting to get the hang of it. And so there's no way for you to control or know exactly the language that a teacher is going to use in your letter of recommendation, but there is a way for you to steer the direction of the letter that's effective and ethical and recommended. And we're going to get into that right now. Actually, not right now. I want to make one more point. I just think this is an interesting piece, and then I promise you we will get into the steps in how to make a request in just a second. There was an article in the Atlantic, and if you don't know the Atlantic, it's a magazine that's pretty well known. And a while back, they had an actual article on letters of recommendation, and I think this is just an interesting point to give you perspective from the teacher on what it's like to be asked for a letter of recommendation or to write a letter of recommendation, and perhaps what else they've got going on. In late September, seniors case my classroom in the early morning and charge in before I've turned on my laptop. Side note, you are going to ask before September of senior year. They corner me at the copy machine and at the entrance to the faculty lounge. They each want the same thing, a letter of recommendation. And when I say yes, the student presses a crumpled brag sheet in my hands and runs in the opposite direction. Most teachers who have seniors as students are lucky if fewer than 20 ask, and generous if they agree to do 15. Writing a meaningful letter of recommendation takes time, a luxury that teachers don't have. Still, it is difficult to say no to a worthy student, especially one who's made a public request with pleading puppy eyes. So think about that. I mean, one, obviously, you might want to ask sooner than fall of senior year. And if you're sitting here listening to us and you're a junior, we're going to tell you to ask right now. Two, this is not the kind of scenario that you want to live, that you want to play out when you ask, saying, okay, thanks, bye, here's something that might help, but off I go. So let's dig into how you might ask. Maureen, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So what's the process? Well, what's important here is your relationship with that teacher, right? So start early and develop the relationship and good habits with just in general, right? In school. And what you want to do when you're thinking about these recs is think about the teachers where you have these connections. Who is it that's been especially significant to you? Maybe it's a subject area that you're really interested in, but maybe it's a challenging subject area, one in which you've really grown. So the first part of this, the process of going to ask a teacher is saying, okay, who's been significant? Who have I kind of dug in deep with? And you want to then approach that teacher and ask them, would they be willing to support you as you take on this endeavor applying to colleges? And I suggest that you share with them, your class has been really important to me for these several reasons, right? So the first step in the process is really thoughtful planning, to sit down and say, okay, really, who has really contributed to my learning in a way that surprised me or really led me to a next step, and determine, okay, where are my connections, right? So then you want to check your websites, make sure that your schools are not asking you for specific academic teachers, and then to sit down and craft that email, because at this point, right, we're asking through email, and have some points as to why that teacher's input would be really important to you with regard to your applications. So that's the thoughtful planning process.
Well, and let's hover on the why here. I think that's the most important. If you walk away with only one thing from this episode today, it's including the why in the ask. Really quickly, just to make it really clear, in case it wasn't, a question came through. When is it too late in the game? And on the slide, we tell you spring break, junior year. So if you're a junior right now, around this time, this is when we'd like you to ask. This is your informal ask, your email to a teacher, which we're going to dig into a little bit more on the next slide, is different from what might be the school-specific process, the official ask. And as we pointed out before, it could be through an online platform like Naviance, where you assign the teachers that you want for letters of rec. There might be some other school policy that you have to follow. So what we're telling you to do is perhaps to ask earlier than what your school is going to ask you to do. But it's never a bad idea to give the teachers a heads up, right? And maybe the language isn't, will you write one right now? It's I'm thinking about my college admissions process, and I would like to include you in it. Would you be willing to write the letter of recommendation? And then when it's time to do that official ask, according to your school, you already have it lined up. But let's talk a little bit more about that why, because I say it a lot, but the K thinks by approach is what you want to avoid. And all that is saying, will you write a letter of recommendation, K thinks by? You'll add more context here. You also might want to avoid some common automatic thoughts that I've seen students have. When I ask them, and we have a pretty lengthy conversation about letter of recommendation candidates, and when I asked them initially, why might you ask this teacher, or what about this teacher is compelling for you as a letter of recommendation writer? Sometimes they'll say, well, I have an A in the class. Okay, well, that's already on your transcript. Or, well, that teacher's known me for a long time. Well, yeah, but knowing you is different than having a vivid story. Or, I really like this teacher. well, that's nice, but you're not writing the letter about the teacher's writing the letter about you. So it's not necessarily the right move to go to the teacher where you have the highest grade. In fact, I often ask students to think about teachers where perhaps they're struggling grade-wise, because it would be wonderful context for an admissions officer. If I'm looking at a transcript and I see, smattering of grades, and I'm wondering, oh, that grade's a little lower than the rest, I wonder what's going on in that class. Well, a letter of recommendation from that teacher would provide some insight and context that I otherwise might not get, and could be helpful in understanding why that grade's a little lower than the rest. So the A is not a good automatic reason to ask a teacher. Sometimes students will say, well, I like that teacher because the class is interesting, and she's really interactive, and she gives us hands-on activities in class, and I like that a lot. I'm like, okay, well, that's about the teacher, but what does that say about you? Perhaps, and this is just an example, you don't say, hey, teacher, I'm asking you for a letter of recommendation because I like the way you teach, but rather the way you teach with interactive activities and group work has shown me how important it is to work collaboratively. I love the teamwork in that classroom. I love the collaboration. I know college is going to demand from me teamwork and collaboration. And I want colleges to know that I am a team player and that I'm great at collaborating. Could you tell that part of my story through a letter of recommendation? And that angle shift, I think, is really important, because that, one, helps the teacher out a lot. I mean, writing letters of recommendation, they all are happy to help, but they're annoying to write. I mean, Maureen and I have had to write letters of recommendation, and I won't speak for Maureen, but it's a chore, right? And so,
and the thing is that I'm sorry, but the purpose is for the teacher to share your strengths. So help them out by sharing your strengths with them, and they'll say, ah, yes, aha, I do remember there was this one story where I can, demonstrate that for the colleges. Sorry, I jumped in there.
No, thank you. And
Yeah.
it's exactly right. And when you write this email asking a teacher for a letter of recommendation, we want you to include those reasons. And if you'd like, maybe even some moments, some specific examples that illustrate the reason that you're providing. And reasons could range from that you're a leader in the classroom, and that you really felt like you've been able to contribute to the classroom experience of others in that academic setting. It could be that you do know you have had the teacher for a long time. Maybe it's a language teacher that you've known since even 8th grade, and they moved from middle school to high school with you or whatever. But then what about knowing you for so long is useful? I mean, how have you changed? How have you developed? Point those specific pieces of your development out to the teacher, because then it gives them something to latch onto for their letter, and it makes it a little clearer for them to go in the direction that you want them to go in. Also, be sure that you take the instructions from your school, your counselor, your teachers very seriously. Many of you will have a packet that you'll have to fill out for your college counselor, especially if you're at a public school. They'll have you fill out perhaps a 15-page packet asking you things from your favorite movies to your greatest strengths and weaknesses to your favorite class. And this is information that they will need to rely on, especially if they don't know you that well. So whether it's a survey, a packet, a deadline, whatever it is, take the instructions very seriously about that come from your high school. And also avoid not allowing enough time. And the question earlier that we already addressed, what is late in the game? I think fall of senior year is late in the game. A lot of high schools, however, will start the process in fall of senior year. They will not tell you of anything about letters of recommendation until fall of senior year. And I don't fault any high school for doing that. I mean, they have their own timeline and process they have to be aware of, but that doesn't stop you from giving some teachers a heads up. And then, of course, we've already touched on this. There are sometimes college-specific requirements. You wouldn't want to miss the fact that you're applying to one of the rare schools that wants a peer recommendation. You wouldn't want to miss the fact that they allow only one teacher, not both, and then you have to later decide which of the two you're going to have sent. And then lastly, and this tends to be more for the other recommender, the one who could be a boss at a part-time job, a coach for a sport that's outside your school or whatever. The writing strength of the recommender is something to consider. The vividness with which your teachers write, if you're unsure about that, that's something you could actually ask your college counselor in your high school about. And if you have two candidates for one of the letters and you're just not sure who is a better writer, but they're all things equal elsewhere, you could ask your college counselor. But if it's outside your school, you have to kind of go with your guts. And there might be no way to know that, but if you do have a sense, for example, maybe you've received a number of emails from this person and you're wondering if the writing is much better than middle school texting, maybe that's not the right candidate for a letter of a recommendation writer. So Maureen, why don't you take us through the big ideas behind today's episode?
Okay, so I think you're receiving the message that we're sending out to you, that thoughtful planning is really important here. So to sit down and say, okay, what role do I want these recommendations to play within the whole of my application? Who do I want to speak to my strengths? What strengths? Who knows them? And to be deliberate about finding those people. And I have to tell you that many times during the process of applying to college, you may have to have conversations with your counselor. We have conversations, just small, quick conversations, 15-minute conversations with students regularly to just make these kind of decisions, like who, let me tell you about my dilemma. Okay, so that is natural. And again, talk it out because you want to be deliberate and you want to make good choices for yourself all the way through your application. So think about who is going to play the strongest role for you, and then go after those two teachers. Okay, vividness. So live your life in a way that is worth writing about. So again, contribute, engage, kind of go forth and take what you need. And if you've done this in the classroom, this is going to come through in your recommendations. It's a place where this vividness will also come through in your essays. So think about those experiences, those memories that represent who you are, and really paint a picture of you that creates the whole person that you are, the excited college applicant who's had many experiences over the last 3 years.
Just to interrupt really quickly on that point, the question again about when is it too late in the game, we're asking you to ask for these letters, to actually engage with teachers in a conversation about these letters around spring break junior year. But the process actually starts much earlier than that, because you are building relationships, you're contributing to the classroom, you're, like it says on the screen, living your life in a way that's worth writing about, hopefully from the beginning of junior year or even earlier than that. I mean, even if you want to be doing that, even if these teachers are not the ones you're going to be asking for letters of recommendation, but perhaps you're building habits that will position you to have strong relationships with your teachers in junior year. So this process is actually a much longer process than people realize.
See, the investment in connection and engagement. So take initiative. And so that is, be forthright, explain why you are asking this particular person for recommendation. And again, it takes some reflection before you approach someone. So it isn't that, dash into the faculty room and dash out and have it be done. Explain why, and provide a context for your requests from this particular teacher. And I also want to tell you that the teachers, just be prepared, because the teachers may actually show quite a bit of interest and ask you, so where are you thinking about applying? What's your plan? Do you know what you might want to study? And any answer to those questions is perfectly appropriate. If you don't know, you can just talk about that a little bit. I'm not sure. I see myself, starting college to experiment with a lot of different subjects. Where am I applying? I have a whole host of schools in the Northeast. You can get as detailed or as general as you want, but just I'm telling you that kind of dashing away is not good in on either side here. And you want to engage with the teacher so that they can really speak to who you are. And then again, the message should be the adult perspective of who you are. Again, this teacher is that glimpse into your daily life, and it's the adult perspective. So you're sharing a piece of your life through your narrative, but here is someone who's standing by you, who's seen you learn and grow, and can describe to the colleges exactly how you do that, what's happened over the past year or two or three, and how have you addressed this? So they can talk about your resiliency, your collaboration, your ability to pull a group together, whatever it is, skill and gifts that you share, they can speak to.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, I'm Jeff Knox, and my colleague is Maureen Delaney. We hope you found that this topic was useful. If you have questions about your particular situation, we're here to help. Our emails are on the screen. Our Twitter handles are on the screen. You can call us. And if you are interested in more information about college admissions topics, join us again next week. Wednesday, 5:10 p.m. And then we also are here Thursdays at 5:10 to talk more specifically about the college essay and application process. So please feel free to join us there. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe and healthy, and best of luck to all of you.
Have a good week.